Mafia boss insulted the black maid in Korean. Her 3 words froze the room. Mafia boss insulted the black maid in Korean. Her 3 words froze the room. Asterisk asterisk. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to our main story. The elegant ballroom was filled with the sound of laughter and clinking glasses. Guests in their finest attire enjoyed the luxurious setting, with the soft hum of music filling the air. At the center of it all sat Victor Romano, the infamous mafia boss, his icy blue eyes scanning the room with an air of authority. He exuded power, surrounded by his loyal associates, who sat at a long, polished table. As they sipped expensive wine and discussed business, their eyes occasionally flickered toward Jasmine Washington, the maid. Jasmine was a woman of dignity, though she was often overlooked by the guests, who treated her as invisible. She had worked for the Romano family for years, cleaning, serving, and doing everything expected of her without complaint. But tonight, something was different. Jasmine had been serving drinks and refilling plates when it happened. One of the guests, a man dressed in a designer suit, knocked over his wine glass in a careless gesture. The liquid spilled across the table, splashing onto the expensive linen. The man sneered and snapped his fingers, calling out, "Hey maid, clean this up." The room went quiet for a moment, all eyes turning to Jasmine. She hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. She was used to the insults, the snide remarks, but this time, it felt different. She could feel the eyes of the room on her, the judgment, the expectation. As she knelt to clean the mess, she heard Victor's voice, cold and sharp, cutting through the tension. In a language that was unfamiliar to most of the guests, he muttered something in Korean. It was a slight, an insult directed at Jasmine. She didn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Her hands froze. For a moment, gripping the cloth, her face flushed with humiliation. But then, something inside her shifted. Jasmine stood up, her eyes meeting Victor's for the first time that evening. Her voice was calm, steady, yet it carried the weight of 1,000 unsaid words. "I am enough," she said, her words piercing the silence in the room. The guests stared in disbelief, the audacity of her words hanging in the air. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Jasmine felt her heart race, her body tense. She had no idea what Victor would do, but she knew that she had crossed a line. She had spoken up. The room remained still, the tension thick, until Victor's gaze softened just slightly. His usual cold expression faltered, and the room fell silent. The mafia boss sat back in his chair, his fingers tapping the surface of the table as he processed what had just happened. The guests, who had expected nothing more than another round of ridicule for the maid, now found themselves stunned into silence. Victor slowly stood up, his sharp gaze never leaving Jasmine. Without a word, he turned to the guests and declared, "This wedding is canceled. We'll deal with this later." The words echoed through the room, and the guests were left speechless. Jasmine stood there, breathing heavily, her body trembling with the rush of emotions that flooded her. She had done it. She had stood up for herself. And for the first time in her life, someone had listened. The tension in the room began to dissipate, but the impact of Jasmine's words would linger long after. As the guests slowly resumed their conversations, a new sense of respect for the maid began to quietly take root. Jasmine was no longer invisible. She had shown the world that even in the face of power and cruelty, her voice mattered. And it had made all the difference. Victor stood there for a moment, his piercing gaze fixed on Jasmine. The tension in the room was palpable, like a charged electric current, as everyone waited for his next move. The guests, once eager to watch Jasmine crumble, now held their breath. For the first time in years, Jasmine felt a sense of empowerment she had never experienced before. She was no longer just the invisible maid, the one to be looked down upon, the one to be dismissed. She had spoken up, and now the room was silent, awaiting a response from the man who commanded so much power. Victor's gaze softened, his icy demeanor flickering for just a moment. He turned his back to the guests and walked towards the large window overlooking the city. The sound of his footsteps echoed through the room, and for a brief second, Jasmine wondered if she had made a mistake. Would he punish her for this? Would she lose her job, or worse, be cast out into the streets? Her heart raced, but she stood firm. The silence stretched on, and then Victor's voice broke through the stillness, low and controlled. "You," he said, turning back to face her, "have some nerve." His words were sharp, but there was no anger, only curiosity. Jasmine remained still, her head slightly lowered but her posture proud. She knew this moment was pivotal. She could feel the weight of it, like a scale tipping in her favor. "I don't need to remind you who I am, do I?" Victor continued, his gaze never leaving hers. Jasmine took a deep breath. "No, sir," she replied, her voice steady, though her hands were still trembling slightly. "But I do need to remind you that I am more than just a maid." The words left her lips before she could second-guess them. She had said what she had to say, and now there was no turning back. For a brief moment, Victor's expression remained unreadable. His eyes were calculating, as if weighing her words, assessing the woman before him. The guests, who had once sneered and whispered, now stood frozen, unsure of what was happening. Jasmine could feel their gazes on her, but she no longer cared. This was about her, and no one else. "I admire your courage," Victor said at last, his tone softer now. "Not many people would dare speak to me like that." There was a flicker of something in his eyes, something Jasmine couldn't quite place. It wasn't the usual coldness she had come to expect. It wasn't pity, either. It was something else, something human. The room remained quiet, the weight of the moment settling over everyone. Finally, Victor took a step forward, his sharp features softening just slightly. "You're not what I expected," he said quietly, almost as if to himself. Jasmine felt a strange sense of relief wash over her. It wasn't a complete victory, not yet, but it was a step toward something more. For the first time, she saw a sliver of respect in Victor's eyes. She had stood her ground, and for once, it had made a difference. The tension in the room began to dissipate, though the air still felt heavy. Jasmine knew she had won a small battle, but the war was far from over. She had earned this moment, and she would hold on to it, no matter what happened next. In the days that followed, the atmosphere at the Romano mansion shifted. The guests who had once seen Jasmine as nothing more than a servant, a background figure in their lavish lives, now watched her with a sense of quiet respect. It was subtle, but it was there. Jasmine couldn't quite put her finger on it, but she felt a change. She had always been invisible in their eyes, a mere shadow passing by. But now, she was something more, something they couldn't ignore. The mornings were still the same. The hum of the mansion, the clatter of silverware, the soft rustle of dusting cloths. But the weight of her interactions with Victor hung in the air like a thin thread, connecting them in a way Jasmine hadn't expected. She had stood up to him, and though she had no idea what his words meant that night, his reaction had been different. Respect. It was something she hadn't anticipated. It felt strange, this new space between them. No longer just a maid and the boss. It was a kind of unspoken understanding, one that neither of them dared to vocalize. Jasmine found herself working with a new sense of purpose. Her steps were lighter, her posture straighter. She moved through the mansion with an unspoken confidence. She was no longer just fulfilling her duties. She was doing them with intention, with a quiet pride that she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. One afternoon, as she was polishing the marble countertops in the kitchen, she heard footsteps approaching. She turned, expecting to see one of the other staff members, or perhaps a guest. But it was Victor. He stood in the doorway, his presence as commanding as ever. He didn't say anything at first, just watched her with those same sharp eyes that had once made her tremble. "Jasmine," he said finally, his voice low but steady. "I need you to come with me." She hesitated for a moment, unsure of what was happening. Was this some kind of punishment? Had he reconsidered his reaction from the other night? She followed him without a word, her heart pounding in her chest. As they walked through the grand hallway, past the gilded mirrors and ornate furniture, Jasmine's mind raced. What was going on? They reached the library, a room she rarely entered. It was quiet, the only sound the soft rustling of pages from a book Victor had been reading. He motioned for her to sit, and she did, though her hands were still trembling. Victor sat opposite her, his eyes never leaving her face. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Jasmine wasn't sure if she should speak or wait for him to continue. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, his voice almost thoughtful. "You showed me something the other night. Something I haven't seen in a long time. Strength. And that's not something I forget." His words were unexpected, and for a moment, Jasmine didn't know how to respond. He continued, "You're more than just a maid. You're a person, Jasmine. And I respect that." The words hung in the air, almost surreal in their weight. Jasmine sat there, stunned. She had never expected this. Victor, the man who commanded empires with a single word, was speaking to her as an equal, as though she mattered, as though she had always mattered. Her mind struggled to process it. "I want to offer you something," Victor said, his tone now more serious. "A position in my office. You'll work directly with me. No more cleaning. You'll be managing the staff, organizing the schedule. You'll have more responsibility, more respect, and more money." Jasmine stared at him, her heart racing. She didn't know what to say. Was this some kind of trick? Could she trust him? Was this just a gesture of guilt for the way he had treated her before? But then she remembered his words from the other night. The way he had looked at her with something other than disdain. Respect. It was real. This wasn't a trick. This was an opportunity. An opportunity she could never have dreamed of. I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Victor smiled, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but it was enough to break the tension. "You don't have to say anything right now," he said. "Take your time. But think about it. This could be your chance to change everything." Jasmine sat back, the weight of his words sinking in. She had come to this mansion with nothing but the hope for a better life. And now, for the first time, it seemed that hope was within reach. She had earned this moment. And whatever came next, she was ready. Victor's offer hung in the air like a weight Jasmine couldn't ignore. It was a dream she hadn't even dared to entertain, a chance to leave behind the life she had known for so long. A life of scrubbing floors, serving drinks, and staying invisible in a house filled with people who never bothered to see her. She had spent years quietly hoping for something more, but now, faced with the reality of Victor's offer, she wasn't sure if she was ready. She had always known her place. She had always been the maid, the one who cleaned up after everyone, the one who was never seen for anything more than the work she did. And yet here she was, sitting across from the very man who had once humiliated her, now offering her a new life, one of power, respect, and responsibility. Jasmine's mind raced as she tried to process it all. Could she really take this step? Could she really leave the past behind and accept this new life? She had always played by the rules, staying quiet and out of sight, keeping her head down. But now, something inside her was changing. She had stood up to Victor before, and that had been the first step. This was the next. She was no longer the quiet, invisible woman who took orders without question. She had a voice. She had power, too. As she looked at Victor, she saw something different in him. He wasn't the cold, untouchable man he had been when she first started working for him. There was something more human in his eyes now, something that showed he saw her as more than just a maid. He saw her as an equal, and that made all the difference. For the first time, Jasmine felt like she mattered. For the first time, she felt like she could be something more than what everyone else had always thought she was. She could be someone who made decisions, who was in control of her own life. "I'll take it," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. Victor raised an eyebrow, surprised by her quick decision. He had expected her to hesitate, to doubt herself. But instead, she had made up her mind in an instant. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice softening just a little. "This isn't going to be easy. There will be challenges. You'll be working directly with me, and not everyone will be happy about that." Jasmine nodded. She had never expected things to be easy. She had spent her whole life working hard, fighting for every scrap of respect she had earned. This would be no different. "I'm sure," she replied, her voice full of quiet determination. "I'm ready." Victor seemed to study her for a moment, his gaze intense. Then, without a word, he stood up and extended his hand. "Welcome to the team, Jasmine," he said, his voice unexpectedly warm. She reached out and shook his hand, feeling a rush of excitement and nervousness all at once. This was it. Her life was about to change in ways she couldn't even begin to imagine. As she left the library, her heart was pounding in her chest, but this time it was with anticipation, not fear. She had accepted Victor's offer, but more than that, She had taken control of her own destiny. For the first time, she felt like she could stand on her own, no longer just a maid, but someone who had earned the right to be respected. She didn't know what the future would hold, but she was ready to face it. With her head held high and her heart filled with purpose, Jasmine stepped forward into the next chapter of her life. In the weeks that followed, Jasmine settled into her new role with a sense of determination that surprised even her. The transition wasn't easy, and it wasn't always smooth. She had always been accustomed to the quiet, solitary work of cleaning and serving, never involved in the business or politics that ran the Romano household. But now, she was at the center of it all, managing the schedules, organizing the staff, and making decisions that had real impact. It was a position she had never imagined for herself, and every day brought new challenges. At first, some of the other staff members were skeptical. They had seen her as one of them, just another maid, and now here she was, giving orders, taking charge, and working directly with Victor Romano. The whispers behind her back were inevitable. They didn't understand why Victor had made such a decision, why he had trusted her with so much responsibility. But Jasmine ignored it. She wasn't here to prove anything to them. She was here for herself. One afternoon, as she walked through the grand hallways, her mind focused on the tasks at hand, she caught sight of Victor in his office. His door was slightly ajar, and he looked up as she approached. "Jasmine," he called, his voice calm but firm. "Come in." She hesitated for a moment, still unsure of where she stood with him. But then she reminded herself that this was her new life, one where she belonged. She stepped into his office and closed the door behind her. "How's everything going?" Victor asked, leaning back in his chair. Jasmine paused, carefully considering her answer. "It's challenging, but I'm managing," she said, her voice steady. "I've had to adjust a lot, but I'm getting the hang of it." Victor nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I've noticed the changes. You're doing well. The staff is more organized, and things are running more smoothly." His words were simple, but they meant more to her than he could know. It was the first time anyone had ever acknowledged her work in such a way. She had spent so long being invisible that it was hard to believe someone like Victor, who had so much power, was recognizing her efforts. "Thank you," she said quietly, her heart swelling with pride. "It means a lot to hear that from you." There was a brief silence, and then Victor leaned forward, his gaze intense. "You're not just a maid anymore, Jasmine. You've proven you can handle more. I'm offering you something else." She blinked, surprised. "What do you mean?" Victor's eyes softened slightly. "I've been thinking. You've done more than just manage the staff. You've shown leadership, and I think it's time you move up again." Jasmine's mind raced. What was he saying? What are you offering? Victor smiled slightly, his usual coldness softened by something else. "I want you to take on more responsibilities. You'll be working directly with me, helping me manage some of the more important aspects of the business. It's a big step, and it won't be easy, but I believe you can do it." Jasmine couldn't believe what she was hearing. It felt like a dream. She had come so far from the woman who used to scrub floors and serve drinks. Now, she was being offered a place beside Victor, a chance to be more than she had ever imagined. She had never thought she would be trusted with something like this, not in a million years. But here she was, being offered a role that could change everything. I don't know what to say," Jasmine stammered, still processing his words. "You don't need to say anything right now," Victor said, his voice steady. "Take your time. But I want you to know that you've earned this. And I'm confident you'll make the right decision." Jasmine's heart raced as she stood there, trying to absorb the gravity of the situation. She had always been told she was nothing. But now, in this moment, Victor had shown her that she was more. She had a future, a chance to prove herself in ways she had never thought possible. She was ready for this. She was ready to take the next step. With a deep breath, she looked up at Victor and nodded. "I'll do it," she said, her voice full of conviction. "I'm ready." Victor's smile was small but genuine. "Good. I knew you would be." Jasmine left his office with a sense of purpose she had never felt before. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was a leader, and she was ready to prove it. As the days passed, Jasmine found herself adjusting more comfortably into her new role. The staff had come to accept her authority, some begrudgingly, others with quiet respect. The mansion's rhythm had changed subtly under her direction, as tasks were carried out with a new efficiency that had been lacking before. Jasmine had earned the respect of the people she once worked alongside. but she was still navigating the complicated dynamics of working so closely with Victor Romano. Though their professional relationship had deepened, the air between them remained charged. They had never been equals before, and now, even as she managed staff schedules and handled the operations of the house, there was an unspoken tension whenever they were in the same room. He had given her this chance, but Jasmine knew he was watching her, testing her in ways she wasn't entirely sure of. One evening, after a long day of meetings and organizing, Jasmine found herself in the staff kitchen, preparing a late dinner for herself. The mansion was quiet, the staff mostly having finished their duties for the day. As she chopped vegetables, she heard the soft click of footsteps in the hallway, and the door to the kitchen opened. She turned, startled, to see Victor standing in the doorway, his usual expression unreadable. He had a habit of appearing unexpectedly, always when she least expected it. "You're still here," he remarked, his voice steady. Jasmine hesitated, wondering what he wanted. "I'm just finishing up," she said, trying to sound casual, though her heart beat a little faster with his sudden appearance. "I thought you'd be resting." Victor glanced around the kitchen, his gaze lingering on the simple meal she was preparing. "I don't need rest," he said, his tone somewhat amused. "And I wanted to see how you were doing. Things are running smoothly, but I'd like to hear it from you. How do you feel about your position now?" Jasmine's mind raced. Was this another test? Was he challenging her ability to lead, to handle responsibility? She took a deep breath and looked at him, meeting his gaze firmly. "I feel good," she said, the words coming with surprising confidence. "I'm learning every day, and I think I'm doing what's needed. There are always challenges, but I'm handling them." She spoke the truth, but she also knew this moment was about more than her job. It was about her proving to him, and to herself, that she belonged here. Victor studied her for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. There was a hint of something in his gaze that Jasmine couldn't quite read. "You're not like the others," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. Jasmine felt a flush rise in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. "What do you mean?" "You don't let the pressure get to you," he said, his tone thoughtful. "You're not afraid to make decisions. I've seen that." Jasmine didn't know what to say to that. The old Jasmine, the one who had kept her head down and avoided attention, would have shrunk away from his praise, unsure of how to handle it. But this Jasmine, the one who had stood up for herself and embraced the opportunity Victor had given her, knew better. "Thank you," she said simply, offering him a small but genuine smile. For the first time since she'd taken this role, she felt something akin to pride. "I'm learning from the best." Victor didn't respond immediately, his expression unreadable. But after a moment, he gave a small nod, his eyes flickering with something like approval. "Keep it up," he said, his voice softer than usual. "You're doing well. Better than I expected." The words hung in the air between them, and Jasmine could hardly believe them. This was the man who had once looked down on her, who had thought so little of her. And now, here he was, offering praise that she never thought she'd hear. But it wasn't just the praise that mattered. It was the realization that, for the first time in her life, Jasmine was standing tall in a world that had once seemed so distant and unreachable. She was not just surviving. She was thriving. As Victor turned and left the kitchen, Jasmine stood still for a moment, absorbing the weight of the moment. She had earned his respect, and she had earned her place here. No longer was she just a maid in the Romano mansion. She was a woman who had built her future with her own hands, and no one could take that away from her. As the weeks continued to pass, Jasmine found herself growing more comfortable in her new role. Her confidence had skyrocketed since Victor's offer, and with each new responsibility, she proved to herself that she was capable of more than she had ever believed. The staff had begun to respect her, and though some still looked at her with skepticism, they knew she was not the same person who had started in this house as just another maid. Jasmine had come a long way, but there was one thing that still loomed over her. The constant reminder that she was still part of a world where power and status determined everything. She was no longer invisible, but she was still very aware of her place in the grand scheme of things. One evening, as she was reviewing some documents in the mansion's office, Victor walked in. His presence was as commanding as ever, but there was a slight shift in his demeanor. He wasn't the cold, distant boss he had once been. There was something warmer in his eyes. He closed the door behind him and leaned against the desk, watching her as she worked. "You've been doing well," "Jasmine," he said, his voice carrying a hint of approval. "I've been keeping an eye on you, and I have to admit, I'm impressed." Jasmine looked up, meeting his gaze with a small smile. "Thank you," she said, feeling a sense of pride swell in her chest. "I've been trying my best." Victor nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I've noticed. And it's not just about the work you do. It's about how you handle yourself. You've come a long way since we first met." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. He was acknowledging her in a way that felt different. Not just as the maid, but as someone who had earned her place beside him. It was a moment of validation she hadn't expected, but deeply appreciated. "I've learned a lot," she replied, her voice steady. "And I'm ready for more." Victor's eyes softened slightly, and for the first time, Jasmine saw something that resembled respect in his gaze. He straightened, pushing himself off the desk. "That's exactly why I'm here," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I have a proposition for you." Jasmine's heart raced. She hadn't expected this. Another offer? Was he about to give her even more responsibility? She couldn't help but wonder what he had in mind. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. Victor took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I want you to take the lead on a new project," he said. "It's a big one, and it will require all of your skills. I trust you, Jasmine. I want you to handle it." Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. This was the moment she had been waiting for. A chance to prove herself even more, to show that she wasn't just capable of managing the day-to-day tasks, but that she could truly lead. "What's the project?" she asked, her voice steady despite the excitement bubbling inside her. Victor hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "It's a new venture we're considering. It involves overseeing some key aspects of the family business. You'll be working closely with me and a few trusted associates. It's a big responsibility, but I think you're the right person for it." Jasmine's mind raced as she processed his words. This was it. This was the opportunity she had dreamed of, the chance to prove that she wasn't just a maid, but a capable, powerful woman in her own right. She had worked hard to get here, and now, the moment had finally arrived. "I'm ready," she said, her voice strong and full of determination. "I'll take it." Victor's lips curled into a small smile, his eyes glinting with approval. "Good. I knew you would. I'm looking forward to seeing what you can do, Jasmine." As he turned to leave, Jasmine sat back in her chair, her heart racing. This was the beginning of something new, something bigger than she had ever imagined. She had come so far, and now, there was nothing stopping her from achieving even more. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was a force to be reckoned with. In the weeks that followed, Jasmine found herself fully immersed in her new role. The responsibility she had taken on was not small by any means. It was the kind of work that kept her up late at night, poring over documents, making calls, and organizing every detail of the new venture Victor had entrusted her with. It was a delicate balance, one that required precision, patience, and a level of leadership she had never thought possible for herself. Yet, she was managing. Every day, she grew more confident in her decisions. Her relationship with Victor had evolved, too. Though he was still the commanding presence in the mansion, there was a quiet respect between them now. She was no longer just the maid he had taken pity on. She was his equal in this new world they were creating, and that was a truth that settled deeply within her. But with this new responsibility came new challenges. Jasmine was no longer just overseeing the day-to-day operations of the house. Now, she was deeply involved in critical decisions that impacted not just the mansion, but the family business as a whole. She was meeting with business partners, coordinating with key players in the family's operations, and handling matters that required a sharp mind and a steady hand. The pressure was intense, but Jasmine had come to realize that this pressure was not something to be feared. It was something that could propel her forward. Yet, with this newfound power, there were moments when she felt the weight of being in such a visible position. The other staff members, though they no longer questioned her authority, still looked at her with a mix of awe and curiosity. Jasmine wasn't just managing the staff now. She was a part of something far larger, and the eyes of the mansion were always on her. One afternoon, after a long series of meetings, Jasmine found herself standing at the window of her office, looking out at the sprawling grounds of the Romano estate. She had never expected to be here, in this position, looking at the world with such a different perspective. As she stood there, deep in thought, she heard a knock at the door. She turned to see Victor standing in the doorway, his usual calm expression on his face. He didn't say anything at first, just studied her for a moment. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice soft but genuine. Jasmine smiled a little, her eyes meeting his. "I'm doing well. It's a lot to manage, but I'm handling it." Victor walked in, his gaze briefly scanning the documents on her desk before settling on her once more. "You're doing more than handling it," he said quietly. "I've seen how you've stepped up, Jasmine. You've handled this with grace, and you've earned my respect." The words hit her harder than she expected. She had grown used to the quiet acknowledgement of her efforts, but hearing Victor say this, hearing him say it so plainly, felt like a weight being lifted off her shoulders. She had worked so hard to get here, and his words were a reminder that she wasn't just part of the team, but someone who had proven her worth. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady. "I couldn't have done it without the opportunity you gave me." Victor nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "You've more than earned that opportunity, Jasmine, and I think it's time for the next step." Her heart skipped a beat at his words. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Victor smiled, a small but knowing smile. "I want you to take on an even bigger role. You've shown you can handle the day-to-day. Now I need someone to represent us at the upcoming business summit. I want you to be there, Jasmine. You'll be the face of the Romano family in that room." Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. This was it. This was the moment that could change everything. She wasn't just managing the operations anymore. She was becoming an integral part of the family's legacy. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm sure," Victor replied, his tone unwavering. "I've seen what you're capable of, and I have no doubt you'll succeed." Jasmine stood there for a moment, trying to process the weight of his words. This was what she had been working toward all along. This was the culmination of everything she had endured, everything she had overcome. She wasn't just part of the mansion anymore. She was part of the Romano Empire. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice steady. "I won't let you down." Victor nodded, a glint of pride in his eyes. "I know you won't." As he left her office, Jasmine sat down at her desk, her mind racing. She had come so far from the woman who had once been invisible. She had fought for her place, and now she was about to step into a role she had never imagined possible. The future was hers to shape, and she was ready to make her mark. The business summit was fast approaching, and Jasmine's nerves were building with each passing day. She had been preparing for this moment ever since Victor had given her the responsibility of representing the Romano family. Every conversation, every decision, every interaction now felt more significant. This wasn't just another task. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, and she knew that how she performed at the summit would shape her future in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. As the day of the summit arrived, Jasmine stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the crisp, tailored suit Victor had insisted she wear. The reflection staring back at her was someone she barely recognized. Gone was the woman who had once been invisible, someone who had hidden in the shadows of the mansion. This was a woman who had earned her place, who was now stepping into a room filled with the most powerful figures in the business world. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and left her room. The drive to the summit was a blur. Jasmine tried to focus on the details of her presentation, but her mind kept drifting. She thought about how far she had come, from scrubbing floors in the mansion to standing in the midst of the business elite. It felt surreal, almost like a dream. When they arrived, Victor gave her a reassuring nod as they entered the building. She could feel the eyes of the room on them as they walked in, and for the first time, Jasmine didn't shy away. She held her head high and walked beside Victor, confident and poised. The conference room was filled with important figures from across the business world, all talking in low murmurs. Jasmine's heart raced as she took a seat at the front table, just next to Victor. She could hear the quiet conversations around her, the soft rustle of papers, and the clinking of glasses. She wasn't just another face in the crowd anymore. This was her moment. The meeting began, and Jasmine listened intently, taking notes as the discussion moved forward. She was expected to present next, and her mind kept circling the key points she needed to hit. She was prepared, she was capable, but the pressure was immense. Finally, it was her turn. Victor gave her a subtle nod of encouragement, and with a steady breath, Jasmine stood up. The room fell into a hush as she began to speak. At first, her voice was soft, unsure, but with each passing word, her confidence grew. She explained the details of the new venture she had been overseeing, outlining the steps they had taken, the progress they had made, and the opportunities that lay ahead. The words flowed more easily than she expected, and by the time she had finished, the room was silent. For a moment, Jasmine stood there, unsure of what to expect. She had laid out everything she had worked on, and now it was up to the room to decide. Finally, a voice broke the silence. It was one of the key partners, a man with sharp eyes and a reputation for being tough. "Impressive," he said, his tone neutral but thoughtful. "This is a solid plan. It's bold, and it's well executed. We'll move forward with this." Jasmine felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had done it. She had stood in front of some of the most powerful people in the business world and delivered a presentation that had earned their respect. The meeting continued, but Jasmine's mind was still racing. She had proven herself. She had taken the opportunity that Victor had given her and turned it into something real. The summit ended, and as she left the conference room, she caught Victor's eye. He gave her a small but knowing smile, one that spoke volumes without saying a word. In that moment, Jasmine realized just how far she had come. She wasn't the woman who had walked into the Romano mansion looking for a way out. She was the woman who had built her future from the ground up. She had made a name for herself, and nothing could take that away from her.